Nós, estudantes de Relações Internacionais da PUC São Paulo e integrantes do Grupo de Estudo de Conflitos Internacionais, firmamos uma parceria com Democracy Now!
A partir de agora, vincularemos com legendas em português as mais importantes notícias internacionais da semana.
From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
앞으로 자주 만나.
Leader Kim said that if North Korea meets the United States more often, builds on trust and promises to end war and non-aggression, why should we have nuclear weapons which make our life difficult?
We'll want to test North Korea in this first meeting for evidence that they have made that strategic decision.
Kim Jong-un tells South Korean officials he would consider giving up nuclear weapons if Washington promises not to attack and commits to ending the Korean War. Trump's national security advisor John Bolton remains skeptical. We'll get the latest. Then we look at the life and legacy of a key figure of Black liberation theology, Reverend Dr. James Cone. Starting in the 60s, he argued for racial justice and interpreted the Christian gospel from the experience of the oppressed. He died Saturday at the age of 79.
Black liberation theology emerged out of the civil rights and Black power movements, symbolized in the life and work of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X.
As the National Lynching Memorial opens in Alabama, we'll also discuss Reverend Dr. Cohen's book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, in which he called the crucifixion of Jesus a first-century lynching. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has pledged to abandon his nuclear weapons if the United States agrees to formally end the Korean War and promises not to invade North Korea. This announcement comes after a historic meeting Friday between Kim Jong-un and South Korean leader Moon Jae-in at the demilitarized zone between the two countries. During the meeting, which was broadcast live on the Korean Peninsula and around the world, the two leaders held hands and pledged to work for peace and replace the 1953 armistice with a formal truce. They also joked with each other, with Kim Jong-un promising he would not wake up Moon Jae-in anymore with early morning missile launches. On Sunday, North Korea's state media said Kim had vowed to immediately suspend nuclear and missile tests and would dismantle one of its nuclear test sites. We'll have more on the historic diplomatic breakthroughs on the Korean Peninsula after headlines. In Afghanistan, a double suicide blast in Kabul this morning has killed 29 people, including 8 journalists. ISIS has claimed responsibility. The first blast occurred in Central District of Kabul, which is home to NATO headquarters and a number of embassies. As first responders and journalists rushed to the scene, a second attacker, disguised as a cameraman, detonated a bomb, killing 8 journalists and photographers. Among the victims was Agence France-Presse's celebrated photographer, Shah Marai. He has been working with AFP in Afghanistan for 2 decades, beginning as a driver for the agency under Taliban rule, and working his way up to become AFP's chief photographer in Kabul. He was the father of 6 children, including a newborn daughter. The AFP Global News Director called Marai's death, quote, a devastating blow for the brave staff of our close-knit Kabul bureau and the entire agency. Last year, Marai wrote an essay about his and his family's life in Kabul entitled, When Hope is Gone. In it, he wrote, life seems to be even more difficult than under the Taliban because of the insecurity. I don't dare take my children for a walk. I have 5 and they spend their time cooped up inside the house. I have never felt life to have so little prospects, and I don't see a way out. Those the words of AFP's chief photographer in Kabul, Shah Marai, killed this morning, along with 7 other journalists in a double ISIS suicide bomb attack that killed at least 29 people. Israeli soldiers shot and killed 3 Palestinians Sunday along Israel's heavily militarized border with Gaza. The killings came after Israeli soldiers killed 3 Palestinian protesters and wounded hundreds more on Friday, when the soldiers and snipers opened fire during the Palestinians' weekly nonviolent protests near the Gaza border. On Saturday, a 4th protester died after succumbing to his wounds. The nonviolent protests demanding the right for Palestinian refugees to return to their land began on March 30th. Since then, the Israeli military has killed at least 42 Palestinians, including 2 journalists, and injured thousands more. No Israeli soldiers or civilians have been injured in the nonviolent protests. Israel's bloody crackdown has sparked international condemnation. In the latest attack on environmental regulations, President Trump the Trump administration has drafted a proposal to freeze fuel efficiency automobile standards beginning in 2021. The draft proposal would also challenge California's power to establish its own stronger fuel efficiency rules, setting up the latest potential clash between the state of California and the Trump administration. This is Sierra Club Executive Director Michael Brune speaking on Democracy Now!
Right now, Scott Pruitt is working on undermining the clean car standard, which is a standard that is supported by 90% of Americans, Democrats and Republicans, because it cuts air pollution, cuts water pollution and climate pollution, and it saves people money. What it does is makes cars more efficient. It helps people to transition to cleaner vehicles, hybrids, plug-in hybrids, electric vehicles, or simply more fuel-efficient vehicles that reduces our dependence on oil, and it makes innovating industries in the auto sector more successful.
National Security Advisor John Bolton said President Trump has not yet decided whether the U.S. will withdraw from the landmark Iran deal, despite President Trump repeatedly threatening to sabotage the agreement. This is John Bolton speaking on CBS's Face the Nation.
Well, there are a variety of things that could happen, and I don't want to get into a discussion of what the hypotheticals might be, but certainly withdrawal is under consideration. The president has said this repeatedly. His views on the nuclear deal have been uniform, consistent, and unvarying since the campaign of 2016, and we'll see what happens.
Secretary of State Pompeo has also reiterated Trump's criticism of the Iran nuclear deal. The National Rifle Association has announced all firearms will be banned from the arena during Vice President Mike Pence's address at the NRA's annual meeting on Friday in Dallas, Texas. The announcement has sparked widespread cries of hypocrisy, given that the NRA has for years opposed regulations banning firearms and has championed the claim that a good guy with a gun makes people safer. Students who survived the Valentine's Day shooting massacre at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School slammed the NRA, with massacre survivor Cameron Kasky tweeting, "The NRA has evolved into such a hilarious parody of itself," unquote. Even some NRA members have criticized the protocol, with one self-identified NRA member writing on a message board for gun owners, quote, "I realize it's the VP, but still makes our whole argument look foolish." President Trump lashed out at the media, Democrats, the FBI, and his other enemies that he sees at a virulent campaign-style rally in Washington Township, Michigan, Saturday night. He attended the rally instead of the annual White House Correspondents Association dinner, which he also skipped last year. Instead, in Michigan, he attacked journalists and the media.
You know, in the old days when the newspapers used to write, they'd put names down. Today they say, sources have said that President Trump, sources. They never say who the source is. They don't have sources. The sources don't exist in many cases. They don't have sources, and the sources in many cases don't exist. These are very dishonest people, many of them. They are very, very dishonest people.
Dr. Ronnie Jackson will not return to his role as White House physician after he withdrew from consideration as Veterans Affairs Secretary amidst a scandal over misconduct claims, including drinking on the job and routinely handing out prescription drugs to West Wing staff, creating a hostile work environment for his colleagues, and once drunkenly banging on the hotel room door of a female employee during an overseas work trip in 2015 until the Secret Service intervened, fearful that he would wake up President Obama. Navy officer Sean Conley has taken over the role as White House physician. More than 150 Central American migrants have arrived at the U.S. border in Tijuana, Mexico, where they're petitioning to receive political asylum in the United States. The migrants are part of a transnational caravan that President Trump has repeatedly attacked. Trump has also deployed members of the National Guard to the border. As the migrants arrived, hundreds of U.S. citizens have offered to open up their homes and welcome members of the caravan to come stay with them if they're allowed to enter the United States and pursue their asylum claims. Most of the migrants are from Honduras, where the U.S.-backed President Juan Orlando Hernandez was recently inaugurated for a second term, despite allegations of widespread election fraud in the November election. The caravan began with more than 1,000 people seeking safety in numbers along the dangerous 2,000-mile journey to the U.S. border. British Home Secretary Amber Rudd has resigned amidst an escalating scandal over how thousands of Caribbean immigrants who have lived in Britain for decades are facing discrimination and deportation despite having legally immigrated to Britain after World War II. Known as the Windrush generation, many of the immigrants never formalized their citizenship after they immigrated from former British colonies. Now, following harsh new anti-immigration laws enacted in 2012, many of them are facing eviction, unemployment, and the possibility of deportation. Conservative politician Sajid Javid has been appointed to replace Rudd as British Home Secretary. Back in the United States, the Arizona Education Association says teachers are on strike today for a third straight day to protest the $1 billion funding cuts to education in Arizona since the 2008 recession. Thousands of teachers in Colorado also rallied in Denver Friday to demand better funding for education there. The protests come on the heels of teacher strikes in West Virginia, Kentucky, and Oklahoma. In business news, Sprint and T-Mobile have agreed to a $26.5 billion merger. If cleared by federal antitrust regulators, the merger would leave only 3 major wireless carriers in the United States. The two companies tried to merge back in 2014, but abandoned the effort after regulators signaled they would likely reject the deal. Experts say the potential merger would likely increase cell phone costs for customers. In New York City, former Black Panther Herman Bell has been freed after spending nearly 45 years in prison. He was released Friday after a judge rejected efforts by the police labor union, the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, to keep him from being released on parole. Bell was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for the killing of 2 New York City police officers in 1971. At the time, he was a member of the Black Liberation Army and a former Black Panther. Since then, he's mentored thousands of young men while behind bars and kept a clean disciplinary record. For years, activists have campaigned for his freedom. Following his release, his support crew wrote, quote, "Let us hope Herman's release brings inspiration for more change. Herman is deeply humbled and grateful for the broad expressions of trust and support, but out of respect for the feelings of the victims' families, he will not be making any public statements. We welcome him home," unquote. And the Reverend Dr. James Cone, known as the founder of Black liberation in the United States, has died at the age of 79. A longtime professor at Union Theological Seminary here in New York City, Dr. Cone was the author of a series of groundbreaking books, including Black Theology and Black Power, A Black Theology of Liberation, Martin and Malcolm in America, A Dream or a Nightmare, and The Cross and the Lynching Tree. Professor Cornel West calls Dr. Cone the greatest liberation theologian to emerge in the American empire. We'll have more on his life and legacy later in the broadcast with the Reverend Dr. Serene Jones, head of Union Theological Seminary, where he worked for decades, Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, and the Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock in Atlanta. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
We're in a climate right now of rising xenophobia against immigrants and refugees. It's coming from President Trump on downwards. And of course, it's a real issue, and we have to struggle against it. But I think there's reason for hope, because this is not a new moment in American history. American history has actually mostly been racist and xenophobic against foreigners and immigrants, and we've overcome that in the past. And that's a hopeful sign that we can win again today.
As President Trump continues to attack refugees and asylum seekers, we spend the hour with two of the nation's most celebrated writers, both refugees themselves. The Pulitzer Prize-winning Vietnamese-American novelist Viet Thanh Nguyen and the Chilean-American writer Ariel Dorfman, who's been described as one of the greatest Latin American novelists.
Have I lived this because I myself am in exile from Chile, thanks to the coup of 1973. And thanks to the U.S. intervention there. But I'm also a writer. So when I hear the hateful rhetoric and I see the immigrants who try to come to this country and move across the world for a better life, I don't really think about that border. I think about how I can smuggle them across that border, smuggle them into our hearts, into our minds.
Today, Ariel Dorfman and Viet Thanh Nguyen for the hour. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The White House is struggling to explain President Trump's shifting accounts of his relationship with Stephanie Clifford, also known as Stormy Daniels, the adult film star who claimed she had a sexual affair with Donald Trump in 2006 and then was hushed. Trump acknowledged for the first time Thursday he reimbursed his lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen for a $130,000 hush money payment Cohen made to Daniels on the eve of the 2016 election. Trump's admission came after another one of his lawyers, former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, made the revelation about Trump's payment during an interview Wednesday evening on Fox News. At the White House, Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders struggled Thursday when asked by reporters about Trump's earlier claims he had no knowledge of the payments.
This was information that the president didn't know at the time, but eventually learned. The president has denied and continues to deny the underlying claim. And again, I've given the best information I had at the time. And I would refer you back to the comments that you yourself just mentioned a few minutes ago about the timeline from Mayor Giuliani.
Giuliani's admission that Trump repaid Cohen caught many White House officials and Trump's allies off guard. On Fox News, host Neil Cavuto, a longtime advocate for the Trump administration, appeared to turn on Trump and Giuliani on Thursday.
How can you drain the swamp if you're the one who keeps muddying the waters? You didn't know about that $130,000 payment to a porn star until you did. Said you knew nothing about how your former lawyer, Michael Cohen, handled this until acknowledging today you were the guy behind the retainer payment that took care of this. You insist that money from the campaign or campaign contributions played no role in this transaction. Of that, you're sure. Thing is, not even 24 hours ago, sir, you couldn't recall any of this, and you seem very sure. Now, I'm not saying you're a liar, you're president, you're busy. I'm just having a devil of a time figuring out which news is fake.
That's Neil Cavuto of Fox News. Legal analysts say Michael Cohen's $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels likely amounted to a campaign finance violation, since it constituted a loan to Trump's campaign that went unreported in federal election filings. President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence are headed to Dallas, Texas today, where they're set to address an annual convention of the National Rifle Association. The Secret Service has banned firearms, knives, and other weapons from today's event, which comes on the heels of high-profile mass shootings, including last October's massacre in Las Vegas, the worst in modern U.S. history, and the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School massacre in Florida, which sparked a national movement of students protesting for gun control laws. Last year, Trump became the first U.S. president since Ronald Reagan to address the NRA. In the Arabian Peninsula, U.S. Army Green Berets secretly deployed to Yemen last December and are helping the Saudi-led coalition seek out and destroy ballistic missiles held by Houthi rebels. That's according to an expose on the front page of the New York Times today, which reports the operation contradicts Pentagon claims the U.S. is limiting its involvement in Yemen to refueling logistics and intelligence sharing with Saudi Arabia and its allies. More than 15,000 Yemenis have been killed since the Saudi-led coalition intervened in Yemen in March 2015. U.S.-backed Saudi-led airstrikes have devastated Yemen's health, water, and sanitation systems, sparking a massive cholera outbreak. It's believed more than 1 million Yemenis have cholera and pushing millions to the brink of starvation. In Syria, anti-government rebels have evacuated areas of Homs province in a Russian-brokered deal that will grant them safe passage to another rebel-held part of Syria. The surrender came amidst a withering assault by Syrian forces. In the Gaza Strip, Israeli forces opened fire with tear gas and live bullets today as Palestinians continued mass protests against Israel's occupation. Haaretz newspaper reports at least 3 people were injured by live fire. The latest crackdown came after a Palestinian teen shot by an Israeli sniper on April 27th died from his wounds on Thursday. Medics say 19-year-old Anas Abu Asr is the 49th Palestinian killed by Israeli fire since mass protests began at the end of March. At least 2 journalists are among the dead. More than 1,000 protesters have been injured. Palestinian medics told Al Jazeera at least 24 people have had their limbs amputated after they were hit by a new kind of ammunition, so-called butterfly bullets, which explode on impact, shattering bones and shredding internal organs. The New York Times reports President Trump has ordered the Pentagon to prepare a plan to reduce the number of U.S. troops stationed in South Korea. The report came as the U.S. and North Korea are making plans for an unprecedented summit between Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to be held in May or June. This week, reports emerged that 3 U.S. citizens imprisoned in North Korea have been relocated to a hotel in Pyongyang ahead of their imminent release. President Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, had said the trio would have been released yesterday. Tony Kim, Tim Hak-sung, and Kim Dong-chul were convicted on espionage charges and sentenced to 2 long prison terms. It's believed North Korea is preparing to return them to the U.S. as a goodwill gesture. The U.S. Justice Department charged a former Volkswagen CEO with criminal conspiracy Thursday over his role in rigging diesel engines to circumvent air pollution standards. A federal grand jury indictment unsealed in Detroit says CEO Martin Winterkorn knew in 2014 that his company's cars contained software that lowered carbon dioxide emissions under testing conditions, even though the car's emissions rose dramatically under real-world conditions. Volkswagen has admitted to rigging some 11 million vehicles worldwide. The automaker has already paid $26 billion in fines and civil damages and faces a $10 billion lawsuit by shareholders. In Arizona, tens of thousands of public school employees have ended a week-long strike after Republican Governor Doug Ducey signed a budget bill that'll grant teachers and school staffers a 20% raise by 2020. The bill will also raise spending on education by another $138 million. The teachers have been demanding the restoration of $1 billion in funding cuts to Arizona's public schools since the 2008 recession. The New York Times reports teacher pay in Arizona is so low that administrators have in recent years recruited teachers from the Philippines to work in public schools under the U.S. J-1 visa program. The winner of the National Teacher of the Year award held a silent protest Thursday against the Trump administration's policies as she was honored by the president in a White House ceremony. Mandy Manning wore 6 politically themed buttons as she accepted her award from Trump, while billionaire Education Secretary Betsy DeVos looked on. Manning's buttons featured artwork from the 2017 Women's March, a rainbow flag, and the slogan, "Trans Equality Now." She later presented Trump with a stack of letters from her students, teenage refugees at Joel E. Ferris High School in Spokane, Washington. After her protest, Manning told USA Today, quote, "I am here for refugee and immigrant students, for the kids in the Gay-Straight Alliance, and for all the girls I've coached over the years." Hawaii's Kilauea volcano erupted Thursday, spewing lava into a residential neighborhood and triggering dozens of earthquakes. The eruption on Hawaii's Big Island caused levels of dangerous gas sulfur dioxide to spike, prompting a mandatory evacuation for at least 1,700 people. In India, the death toll from heavy rainfall and a major dust storm has risen to 127 as officials blamed heat wave conditions for extreme weather that came weeks ahead of the normal monsoon season. The deaths came days after an unprecedented heat wave in neighboring Pakistan saw temperatures in parts of the country climb above 50 degrees Celsius Monday, or 122 degrees Fahrenheit, an all-time record for Pakistan. The extreme weather came as Oxfam reported wealthy countries have contributed only about half of a $100 billion target pledged under the Paris Climate Accord to help poorer nations reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to a warmer planet. Activists with Black Lives Matter have called a nationwide protest today against Waffle House restaurants after a viral video showed the violent arrest of an African-American patron by a pair of white police officers in Alabama. The incident occurred April 22nd at a Waffle House in suburban Mobile, where employees called police after 25-year-old African-American woman, Shakisha Clemens, objected to a 50-cent charge for plastic utensils. In cell phone video shot by Clemens' friend, the officers are seen pinning Clemens to the ground, exposing her breasts. As one of them says, "I'll break your arm. That's what I'm about to do."
Where are you going? Man, about to break your arm. That's what I'm about to do. You about to break my arm?
Protesters are demanding charges of disorderly conduct and a resisting arrest against Clemens be dropped. They're also demanding discipline for employees who were part of the incident, access to police video, and a statement from Waffle House denouncing how Clemens was arrested. Protesters say they'll spend just $2 to purchase sodas. They can occupy seats at Waffle House restaurants nationwide during peak business hours today. Meanwhile, the White House said this week it's working to set up a meeting between President Trump and James Shaw, Jr., a 29-year-old African-American resident of Nashville, Tennessee, who's been credited with saving many lives after he wrestled an assault rifle from a gunman as a mass shooting at a Waffle House last month, also on April 22nd. The White House's overture came after Trump came under criticism for remaining silent over the heroic actions of Shaw, who is African-American. A FundMe site was set up for Shaw, who also was injured by the gunman. He gave all of the money to the families of the victims of the mass shooting. In Charlottesville, Virginia, a jury has found 34-year-old Georgia resident Alex Michael Ramos guilty of malicious wounding over his role in the parking lot beating of DeAndre Harris, a 20-year-old African-American man who was brutally assaulted by white supremacists at a far-right protest in Charlottesville, Virginia last August. Photos and videos show at least 6 white supremacists punching, kicking, and beating Harris with large metal poles. Ramos is the first person convicted for the assault. He faced up to 20 years in prison, but a jury sentenced him to a 6-year term with no fine. Even though he was badly beaten, Harris was arrested on a felony charge of unlawful wounding after the assault. In March, he was acquitted of charges. Meanwhile, ProPublica reports that an active-duty U.S. Marine was among the far-right protesters in Charlottesville last summer. The news site published a selfie photograph of 18-year-old Vasilios Pistolas in his Marine uniform, revealing he's a member of the neo-Nazi group Atomwaffen. After the Charlottesville protests, Pistolas bragged about assaulting transgender activist Emily Gorsensky, who came out to confront the Unite the Right rally. The state of Georgia is set to execute condemned prisoner Robert Earl Butts Jr. tonight. Earlier this week, Georgia's parole board issued a 90-day stay to examine his case, but then 18 hours later, the board lifted its own stay. Butts will become the 1,475th person to be executed in the United States since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio is backing a plan that would see the city become the first in the U.S. to open supervised injection sites for intravenous drug users. The plan is aimed at ending an epidemic of overdoses, mostly from opioids, which saw more than 1,400 deaths in New York City last year alone. Cities in Canada and Europe say they've succeeded in cutting overdose deaths while combating HIV, hepatitis, and other viruses by setting up safe injection programs. And news from Capitol Hill, House Chaplain Patrick Conroy has rescinded his resignation just 2 weeks after House Speaker Paul Ryan demanded he resign. On Thursday, Ryan said Conroy can remain in his position. According to the Washington Post, Ryan initially forced Conroy into retirement over a prayer the chaplain delivered last November while the House was debating a Republican tax bill that overwhelmingly favored wealthy Americans.
May their efforts these days guarantee that there are not winners and losers under new tax laws, but benefits balanced and shared by all Americans.
And in Georgia, a federal court has filed an indictment against 7 Catholic Plowshares activists who were arrested for protesting last month at Kings Bay Naval Base, the largest nuclear submarine base in the world. The activists entered the base on the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, April 4th. They were armed with just hammers, crime tape, and baby bottles containing their own blood. The activists said they were following the prophet Isaiah's command to beat swords into plowshares. In a statement from Georgia's Camden County Jail, Plowshares activist Claire Grady wrote, quote, "We say the ultimate logic of Trident is omnicide, and yet the explosive power of this weapon is only part of what we want to make visible. We see that nuclear weapons kill every day by their mere existence. We see the billions of dollars it takes to build and maintain the Trident system as stolen resources, which are desperately needed for human needs." And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
Nosso programa fica por aqui. Você pode acompanhar a gente pela página do Facebook e pelo blog do GECI Terra em Transe. Nos vemos na próxima semana. Até lá!